Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I figured I would go through my 2025 reading wrap up. In 2025, I read about 97 books, I believe. I was really close to hitting 100, but I just could not and did not want to squeeze in those 3 extra books during the holiday time. I was very busy, spending a lot of time with family, doing a lot of things, so I didn't get to hit 100, but 97 books is still a lot of books to have read in a year. Instead of going through each and every one of them, I figured I would go through each month and give you the best and worst. There were some months where I couldn't choose my best read, so there are a few ties in here. I think there might be a month or two where there was also a tie for the worst book. All that being said, let's just go through them. In January last year, I only read 3 books. I started 2025 out with a massive reading slump and didn't read anything for the first 3 weeks of the year. So I really only finished 3 books in that last week. Out of those 3 books, my favorite book that I read was Everything We Never Had by Ribay. It goes through the history and experiences of Filipino Americans through different generations. The oldest generation follows Francisco, who moves from the Philippines to the US to earn money to send back to his family in the Philippines. He works long days in horrible conditions out in the fields in California. Then the next point of view follows Emil, who is the son of Francisco. His perspective takes place in the 1960s, and it follows his experiences as a Filipino American in school, follows the racism that he faced, as well as talks about the protests and activism by the migrant workers in California. The third perspective is Chris, Emil's son, follows a Filipino American who's out of touch with his Filipino culture, doesn't know much about what's going on in the Philippines, and his journey learning about Filipino history. And then finally we have Enzo, who is the son of Chris, and this follows the Filipino American experience during 2020 in the time of the pandemic. I know that the pandemic is not a very popular topic to be reading about, and honestly, I wasn't the hugest fan of those sections either, but I thought that this did a very good job at highlighting how generational trauma works, how it develops, and the impact that it has on future generations. I also really enjoyed learning about various aspects of Filipino culture and Filipino history. I don't know as much as I would like to about Filipinos and about my own culture, and so I think that this is just a really good read for those who don't know much and would like to learn more. Then my least favorite read of January was A Bond Me for Two by Trinity Nguyen. This was included in my book unhaul video from last year. I clearly have not gotten around to actually getting rid of the books in that video. They're still kind of scattered. Some of them are still scattered around my apartment right now. I actually enjoyed this one a decent amount. I rated it around 3 stars, so I didn't think it was bad by any means. I just think that it was forgettable. It wasn't as deep in Vietnamese culture as I had wanted it to be. I didn't think the plot was as strong as I had hoped it would be. The characters fell a bit flat and I had a hard time connecting to them. And honestly, the other 2 books that I read in January was just better than this one. I don't think that this is a bad book by any means. It just didn't give me as much as I was hoping for. In February, I read 7 books, my favorite one being What Happens After Midnight by K.L. Walther. This is a YA romance that follows a group of high school seniors carrying out this Joker tradition in which the Joker plays a huge prank on the boarding school that they attend, and he enlists the help of a couple people to help him pull off this prank. This is a second chance romance. I thought that it was very cute. It gave very similar vibes to The Summer of Broken Rules by the same author. So if you enjoyed that book, I would highly recommend trying this one. It just had this huge sense of nostalgia, fun things before life gets too serious type of deal. I thought that the two characters in here had really, really good chemistry. And overall, I thought this was just a very fun plot, a very vibes book, to be honest. I will say that if you're looking for something a little bit more substance, you're not really going to find it with this one. I don't think that there was anything too special in this book, too unique. It was just very fun, very cute, wholesome, very nostalgic. I absolutely loved this one. And then my least favorite book, I actually do not have anymore. I think this was also included in my book on haul video, but it is The In-Between Bookstore by Edward Underhill. This book follows a character as he comes back to his hometown. He returns back to the bookstore that he used to work at as a teenager, but I think every time he entered the bookstore, it went back in time. He was transported back in time to when he was a teenager and when he was working there. So he got to see his teenage self. It kind of follows this friendship breakup as he figures out what's going on in his life. He tries to figure out why him and his best friend had fallen out, like what happened between them. I really did not like this book. I thought that the characters were boring. I thought that the main character, Darby, was incredibly self-pitying. I don't think that he had any character arc at all over the book. I really don't think that he learned his lesson and understood exactly what was going on. The book is filled with miscommunication. I just did not like this at all. I don't think that the true conflict was resolved on the best friend's side at all. I couldn't root for their friendship. The concept of the time traveling bookstore was very interesting to me. I did really want to know how this worked out and like wanted to see this concept play out, but it just fell a little flat. It didn't really do anything to further the plot. Yeah, this book just was not it for me, unfortunately. But after February, I went into March, and March was the best reading month I think I had all year. I read 8 books total. 3 of them were 5 stars and 2 of them were 4.75 stars. Just as an honorable mention, my 2 4.75 stars were One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig and Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Both of those were really good, practically perfect on paper in my opinion, but for some reason we're just missing the tiny little like 5-star feeling for me, and that's why they landed at 4.75. Moving on to my best of the month. March is one of the months where I just could not choose a favorite, and so my 3 5-stars. The first one is My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. This is a book that follows a girl, Anna, who wants to get medical emancipation from her parents because she has undergone countless surgeries and like operations, blood transfusions to help her sister Kate, who is suffering from leukemia. This goes into a lot of medical ethics. I think that the concept of this was really, really good. I love delving into the ethical dilemma on both the parent side, the legal side, of wanting to help Kate, wanting to help this terminally ill girl, but also fighting for bodily autonomy for Anna. This is a multi-POV book, so you get to see the implications of this legal process on everybody. This was such a good read for me. I wasn't expecting it, especially because I already knew a majority of the story from the movie. I haven't seen the movie in full, but I have seen clips of the movie, like various scenes, so I had a general idea of what was going on in this book, and the execution of this was amazing. Absolute 5-star read. I thought it was so good. Then my next 5-star read was Funny Story by Emily Henry. Funny Story is actually my very first Emily Henry book. This follows Daphne, whose fiance dumps her for his childhood best friend. So she moves into the ex-boyfriend of her fiance's childhood best friend. They become roommates and just go from there. I absolutely loved Miles. I thought that he was such a good character. I thought that he was incredibly sweet, incredibly thoughtful. I thought that the chemistry between him and Daphne was very strong. I also related a lot to the struggles that these characters were going through in making adult friendships and trying to be your own person outside of a relationship. I just had such a good time with this. I was very wary of it because of how much hype Emily Henry gets and how much hype Funny Story in particular has, but like, this is me adding to it. I absolutely loved this book. It was so good. And then the final 5-star that I read in March was A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang. This follows a girl in like ancient China who gets recruited by this military advisor and trained to be a consort, I think it's called. Yes, consort. She gets trained to be a consort and act as a spy on the warring kingdom. I thought that the writing in this was really enchanting. I was completely immersed the entire time reading this. Like, this book gave me so many feelings. I couldn't put it down. Even while I was working, I just kept thinking about this and wanting to go back to it. I really loved the humanization of the evil kingdom and like showing the duality of war and how it impacts both kingdoms. And yeah, I thought that this was really, really good. I think my main critique of this book is that I wished it had a little bit more of the politics. I wish that it went a little more in depth in the whole war scenario, but still, it completely took over my brain. This became my personality for a solid amount of time. It was so good and one of my favorite reads. On the other hand, my least favorite read of March, I also do not have. This yet again was probably included in my unhaul video, but it was Accidentally Amy by Lynn Painter. I was reading that as a palate cleanser after A Song to Drown Rivers, but before Sunrise on the Reaping. I wanted like a little brain break book between the two because I didn't want to compare Sunrise on the Reaping to the 5 stars that I had read previously, like just finished. So I picked up Accidentally Amy, and it was probably, not even probably, definitely my least favorite Lynn Painter book that I had read. It follows this girl whose name I don't remember, but it is not Amy. She goes to this coffee shop before a job interview, starts to run late, and decides to pick up a coffee that had been sitting there for like 5 or 10 minutes that belonged to a girl named Amy. She picks it up, runs into the male main character, and the male main character starts flirting with her. Fast forward to her job interview, she meets the male main character at work, and he realizes that her name is not actually Amy. This causes this whole like miscommunication, little rivals. I don't even want to call it enemies, but this dislike from the male main character to the female main character that I thought was completely overdramatic. Yes, she took a coffee that didn't belong to her, and she probably shouldn't have, but the way that this male main character was treating it, you would have thought she murdered his puppy or something. Like, it just felt completely overdramatic to me. I didn't think it warranted that much. There was very little chemistry, very little emotional development between them. It felt completely physical when they finally got together. The story also felt very disjointed. It felt like she had a bunch of scenes written and then just like haphazardly stitched them together, which I think might have actually been what happened, because I think I saw at the back of the book that she had written this as little short story scenes for her email like her mailing list that she ended up putting together for a book. But yeah, this just did not work for me. It was very, very blah. I didn't absolutely hate it. I didn't feel the need to DNF it. I just thought that it was very silly, very ridiculous, not at all on par with some of the other books that I've read from Lynn Painter. Then in April, I only read 3 books in April, and this is because April was the month I decided to read the Mistborn trilogy. When I say I read 3 books in April, really what I mean is I DNF'd one of them and then read 2. The best book that I read is The Well of Ascension, which is book 2 of the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I don't really want to go into the synopsis of The Well of Ascension just because it does have a lot of spoilers for book 1, but I did like it better than book 1 because I felt like book 1 was way more focused on the world building. There was a lot of things to learn about the universe, about these characters. There were a lot of people to be introduced to, a lot of magic to learn, a lot of politics to get set up on, and so I had a little bit of trouble getting into book 1, but book 2 was just a lot more plot and a lot easier to get through for me. Book 2 also had a lot more politics, which I thought was very intriguing. My main problem with book 2, and honestly with the entire trilogy as a whole, was the romantic relationship included in it. I wasn't really a fan of them. I don't think that they had chemistry. I didn't really understand it or root for it. And that relationship had a fairly big emphasis during book 2. I don't know what else to say because a lot of my thoughts on book 2 included spoilers for book 1, so I don't really want to mention it. So moving on, the book that I DNF'd is a hot take. I know that Book Talk absolutely loves this book. It is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, and I did not like it at all. It might be that thrillers are just not my genre. At least that has been my explanation for every thriller that I've disliked that Book Talk absolutely loves, because it's not. I really don't read a ton of thrillers, but None of This Is True I found just really slow, really boring. It reminded me a lot of Listen for the Lie, which I had read in, I think, February this year, but I loved Listen for the Lie way more than I liked None of This Is True. I DNF'd it around 50% because I read about half the book and it still felt like we were in the middle of setup. I didn't feel like anything had happened at that point. I didn't care for either of the characters. I didn't like or hate them. They were just there. At the point that I DNF'd, I didn't even feel like there were any stakes to the book. It didn't feel very thrilling at all. And even the weird and creepy things that were going on didn't really creep me out or sketch me out at all. They were just like, oh, that's a little odd. So yeah, at 50%, it was just getting way too painful to read. I was starting to fall into a reading slump, and so I just decided to completely DNF it. Then in May, I read 10 books. I have 2 books that I have kind of tied for my best reads of the month. One of them is The Hero of Ages, which is the 3rd book in the Mistborn trilogy. I absolutely loved The Hero of Ages because that is when everything started coming together. As I mentioned before, book 1 is really just set up, and then throughout books 2 and 3, you start seeing the payout. You start seeing all of the details that were included and that you didn't think were very important at the beginning of the series start to come back into play towards the end of the series. I thought that the ending of the series was really, really good. It gave me chills. I thought it was really beautiful. I can't really speak much to the parts of this book that I loved because it will give spoilers, or at least make it too obvious to where this book is going, where the series goes. So I don't really want to say anything. I was very impressed by the amount of planning that went into it, and it makes me very excited and intrigued about all of the planning that is going into the rest of the Cosmere. Is that what the Sanderson universe is called? That sounds right. The other top read that I had for May was We Are Not Free by Traci Chee. This is a young adult book that follows Japanese Americans during World War II and follows the journey of them being put into internment camps. Each section follows a different character, gives different perspectives of what was going on. Each section has its own writing style, which I thought was very, very unique. I absolutely loved this book because I feel like it highlights a lot of things that are passed over during American history classes. I absolutely loved the mixed media in this. I just think that the execution of this specifically was so well done and so unique. And I think more people need to read this. This is an incredibly underrated book, in my opinion. Also in May, I read a series, and this entire series collectively were my least favorite reads of the month. That is The Summer I Turned Pretty. But specifically in this series, book 3, We'll Always Have Summer by Jenny Han. Book 3 was the worst. This was the absolute worst offender. My main issue with this entire series as a whole is that Belly sucks. She's incredibly self-centered. It didn't really seem like she had chemistry or really even liked either of the guys. It didn't seem like either of the guys really liked her. There was no relationship development between her and Jeremiah or her and Conrad. Like, the entire situation was completely toxic. I despise this book because I think that it completely ruined Jeremiah's character. Everything that happened in this book felt out of character, at least in my opinion, for Jeremiah. I don't think that anything in the first 2 books really showed that he would be like this for book 3. I had such high hopes for this. I think book 3 was the absolute worst offender because book 2 was actually fairly decent. Book 2 had some substance to it. There was a little bit more development. All of the characters were a bit more likable, and it felt like there was an actual plot line in book 2. And so going into book 3, I had hopes, and book 3 let me down so hard it just made me crash and burn. Absolute worst read of May. Honestly, one of my worst reads of the year. Definitely isn't the worst read of the year. If you've seen anything on this channel, you can probably guess which one is my least favorite read of the year, but this is right there with it. It's pretty close. Then in June, I read 4 books. I had 1 5-star, and that was Releasing 10 by Chloe Walsh. This is the 6th book of the Boys of Tommen series. It follows Hugh and Lizzie during the events before the rest of the series. This, I know, is a very controversial book because it is so dark. It has a lot of difficult topics, a lot of heavy things going on in this book. I think that the author handled all of those heavy topics very well. I don't think she romanticized anything that happened in this book. I think it all felt very raw and very real to me. I think that even though the topics were really heavy, it was written in a way that made it easy to understand. I don't think that there is a book that has ever made me cry harder than this one. I finished this book and was bawling for like 5 or 10 minutes. Like, I had a solid cry, got on the phone with somebody to talk about it, cried again, got on the phone with my partner to tell him about it, cried again. Like, this was so good. I honestly think about this fairly often. I do have a hard time recommending this series as a whole because of all of the heavy topics that are discussed. There are so many trigger warnings for this book, but also for the entire series, that you should check before going into it. I made the mistake of not checking it and found one of my triggers in book 4 of this series. So please be careful if you do decide to pick up The Boys of Tommen. I think my one main critique for this book, but also for the series as a whole, is the way that the author handles sexual harassment or assault when it's towards any of the guys in the series. When there's sexual harassment or assault for the girls in these books, it's handled with a lot of care and it's heavily emphasized. Like, you fully see the impacts of it, fully see them processing it and dealing with it and all of that stuff. But for all of the guys, I feel like it just gets brushed over. At least up until this book, we haven't seen any of the guys truly deal with any sexual harassment or assault that they faced. I don't want to be very specific on who in this group of friends experiences it, but I do think that when those types of things happen to her male characters, they are not handled as delicately or as appropriately as when those incidents happen with her female characters. So I do hope that in future books, the male characters get that sort of redemption, get to truly process and are handled with more care. Moving on from that, the worst book that I read in June was The Beast Within by Serena Valentino. So I actually don't think that this was a bad book. I just think that everything else that I read during June was better. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, if you can't tell by the cover, and it kind of plays with the story of why and how the Beast was cursed to be like this, as well as his experience with it. I do think that the reasoning behind the curse in this book makes more sense than the reasoning in the curse of the Disney movie, but this was just a very simple read, very easy. It's honestly kind of forgettable. I liked the concepts in this book, but I don't think that there was really anything special to it. But yeah, it's forgettable, not really much to say about it, even though I'm still talking. So let's just move on. Then in July, I read 9 books, 3 of which were the Beartown trilogy by Fredrik Backman. And so as a result, the best book that I read in July was Us Against You by Fredrik Backman. This is the second book in the Beartown trilogy. I rated the entire trilogy 4 stars, but this one I gave a 4.25. I honestly don't really remember the differentiating factor between this book and the other 2 books that made me rate it a little higher. I do know that I really enjoyed the character development that occurred in this book. This just follows our characters in the aftermath of the first book, whose events I will not say because of spoilers. I think this book just made me fall even more in love with these characters, introduced me to more characters that I fell in love with, and just overall was a very good read. I thought that this one was really good. I think Fredrik Backman's writing is really good. He makes you care about every character, and he makes everything seem important, even if it feels like a mundane life event. It makes everything feel very realistic and like you are somebody else in this small town. Then my least favorite book of July is What Kind of Paradise by Janelle Brown. This follows a girl who grew up in isolation with her dad. This event occurs, she goes off to California on her own, breaks free, and just like separates from her father. I feel like the plot was very interesting for this book, but that I felt a little lost and disconnected from it because I just kept wanting to know about the backstory of these characters. I wanted more answers than I was getting. I think that this was fairly slow paced. The author has a ton of sections in here that feel like soapbox rants about the dangers of technology. And while some of those did make me stop and think a little bit, it started feeling very repetitive and very like preachy. There are events that happened after she gets to California that I feel like didn't really make any sense, and that there wasn't enough development to back up some of the actions that the characters were taking. I feel like this had all of the bones for a setup of a found family, but without being found family. Those relationships never really became important in this story. My main thing that I liked about this book was the morally gray conflict that she had around her dad. I liked that things just aren't so black and white. But yeah, overall, this just wasn't for me. I feel like I just didn't care enough about any of the characters to care about anything that was going on in the story too much. Then in August was a very big reading month for me. I read 13 books, one of them being a 5-star, and that was Know My Name by Janelle Miller, carrying on the trend of reading books with trigger warnings. This is a nonfiction book. This is a memoir of Janelle Miller. She writes about her experience as a rape victim in the justice system. This talks a lot about her experience through the Brock Turner trial and basically just how the justice system failed her. This doesn't focus on the assault as much as it focuses on the justice system and how society treats survivors. Despite all of that, I think that this had a really good message of hope, and that despite everything, there will always be good people to help along the way. Janelle Miller is an amazing writer. Her writing is beautiful, very eloquent, very powerful, and I think that everybody should read this book. My least favorite book of August was Cluelessly Unscripted, a showbiz romance mystery by Patricia Puentes. This is the first book in the Sol and Luke mystery romance series. This follows an entertainment journalist named Sol who gets caught in the middle of a theft investigation in which Luke is the detective. He is trying to figure out who stole a script for a Netflix show. I really wanted to like this. The premise sounded so silly, but like cute. It just seemed like a very fun book, but the execution fell flat for me. The characters felt one-dimensional. I didn't think that their flirting, their banter was very interesting. The mystery was predictable. The writing had so many pop culture references, so many TikTok references, which made it feel incredibly cringy to me. I also felt like the author over-explained everything. A lot of details were mentioned repeatedly. She didn't really trust her readers to figure things out by themselves, and it almost felt like the writing was being done to hit a word count rather than to make an immersive story. Then in September, I read 7 books with 1 DNF. Surprisingly enough, the DNF is not my worst book of the month. First, let's go with my best book. The best book was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. Similar to Funny Story, I was very worried. I was worried that it wasn't going to live up to the hype. I know a few people in my real life that has read this and absolutely loved it, and I was just worried that I wasn't going to get it, but I get it. I absolutely loved Brianna and Jacob together. I loved that Jacob isn't the stereotypical like golden retriever or like macho man. He has a lot of anxiety, and I felt like the anxiety depiction was fairly accurate. I loved the way that Brianna showed up and worked around his anxiety. There were a ton of pop culture and TikTok references in here, which I did not love. That bothered me and took me out of the story a bit, but the notes and letters that Brianna and Jacob were writing to each other were just so cute and so sweet that it made up for it. I thought that the yearning in this was really, really good. It was frustrating. It was gut-wrenching. The last quarter of the book tore me to shreds. I really was rooting for these two to get together. I love them together. And I thought that this was So, so good. Before I get into my least favorite book of September, I do want to talk about the DNF that I had, which was The Vegetarian by Han Kang. The Vegetarian, I was very excited to read because I had heard so many good things about it. I ended up DNFing this about halfway through. This book has 3 different sections that follows 3 different points of view. One of them is her husband, one of them is her sister's husband, and the third one is her sister, I believe. And I read through the first 2. Sorry, let me go back and tell you what this is about. The Vegetarian follows this Korean woman that starts having these nightmares and suddenly becomes vegetarian. And then it shows her familial reactions to that. I thought that the writing was very good. I think that the writing was doing its job, but I could not stomach it. I was struggling so hard with reading the dehumanization, the objectification of this woman. I was struggling really hard with how everybody in her life was trying to control her. I hated reading from the male point of views in this story. They were just so disgusting. I could really only read this at like a page at a time, 2 pages at a time, because of how grossed out and uncomfortable I felt through it. I think that this is a great book to read. I think that it did its job very well. And like I wanted to get through it and push through it, but I just could not. It was so hard for me to read because of the topic, because of these despicable points of view. I couldn't stomach it. And so this was a DNF. But I do recommend this. I think that it is a very good book. I think that people should be reading it. But yeah, I could not get through it. But moving on from that, my least favorite book of September, and honestly, I was gonna say of the entire year of 2025, but honestly, of my entire life, I don't think I have ever hated a book as much as I have hated A Big Storm Knocked It Over. If you saw my unhaul video, I went on a rant for this. I read this during a reading vlog, I'm pretty sure, and went on a rant on it during that video too. So I'm gonna try not to rant about it for too long in this one. Long story short on this, the main character was so insufferable. I could not stand her. I have a very hard time being empathetic for people who decide that getting into a marriage and having a child will solve all of your problems, will solve all of your insecurities, will just fix your life. I cannot empathize with those people because I don't understand the logic. I just don't understand how you think that's okay. It's not fair to your child. I also think that there were a ton of topics in here that could have given more intrigue and could have had more commentary in this book that didn't have any. Overall, this is a book that I absolutely wish I DNF'd, but I didn't and couldn't because I was reading this for my Herkia challenge and absolutely needed it for a prompt because I couldn't find another book to fit. Moving on to bigger and better things. In October, I read 9 books, one of them being a 5-star, and that was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am sure if you are on BookTube, BookTok, any of the book social medias, you probably have heard a ton about this book. This follows a woman in the 80s who joins the NASA space program when they first start letting women into the program. It follows her journey into becoming one of the first women in space. This explores both her professional and personal life, her professional and personal development, and the struggles of being a woman and balancing the two, especially during this time period. This is my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I absolutely loved this so much. I think that her writing is beautifully simplistic. The story was a bit predictable, but I think that the execution was incredibly well done. I connected with every single one of these characters. This alternated between two timelines, the past and present. In the past, you're following her journey, and in the present, you are following a space mission. And so during the present time, I thought the writing was really well done. You were put in the middle of the action. You felt the stress. You felt the anxiety of being on the space mission. Despite being able to easily predict what was going to happen in this book, there were scenes in here that still got me. I still cried to it. Like, it felt incredibly real, and I just loved it. My least favorite book of October was Pumpkin Spice and Everything Nice by Katie Cicatelli. I know I ranted about during my unhaul video and also my October wrap up, so I will try to keep this pretty brief. When I picked it up, I didn't know that it was a YA book. I thought it was going to be an adult romance, but this was neither adult nor romance. The main character was overdramatic. I thought that her hatred for pumpkin spice lattes was kind of ridiculous and weird. I thought that she was very self-pitying. I thought that she was really rude to this guy who literally did nothing. Overall, it was just really disappointing. I don't really think she had a character arc. I feel like the resolution just came as a split-second aha moment as opposed to actual development and learning and things like that. I did not have a good time with this one. Now on to November. November was a very big reading month for me. I read 14 books, and my favorite one, which is a complete plot twist for everybody, was Stiff by Mary Roach. This is a nonfiction book, which is absolutely wild that I chose a nonfiction book as my favorite read of the month as a primarily fiction reader. This book explores all of the different things that can be done with cadavers. I thought that this was incredibly informative. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not a fan of like dry or morbid humor, but I absolutely loved it. I thought that the humor made it more interesting. I listened to this on audio actually, and the narrator I think did a really good job at keeping it interesting. The writing was addictive while still being informative. Highly recommend this one. I want to read more by this author. Then my least favorite book of November, I actually have a tie for two. Neither of these books I thought were very bad. I didn't think that they were horrible. They just were the worst in the bunch. The first one is The Compound by Aisling Rall. This follows a girl who goes on a reality TV show in which she has to partner up every night and complete challenges for rewards. I think that the concept was pretty interesting, but I didn't enjoy it too much because I thought that the main character was very vain. I thought she was a little bit annoying to read from. The book had the potential to have a ton of commentary, but that the commentary wasn't too deep. Everything about this book seemed like it would be a thriller. The synopsis, even reading it, the pacing felt like it was setting up to be a thriller. And at the end, some events got really weird and escalated very quickly, but it still wasn't completely a thriller. I felt like it was in between a literary and a thriller, but didn't do a very good job at being either of them. Even so, I didn't dislike this book. I rated it at 3.25 stars. Like, I still was having a fairly decent time reading it, but it was just kind of middle of the road for me. I wanted more from both the literary side and the thriller side. The other book on my least favorites of November was Influence by R.H. Grund. This book is another book that I thought had a very good premise. It follows this girl, Virginia, who is obsessed with a social media influencer, Minerva, and decides to go to California to meet her. And then on her journey there, and when she gets to California, a bunch of things go down. I talked about this book a lot during my November wrap up, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but this is a paranormal kind of body horror book, I think. I feel like this book had absolutely no resolution. It felt like it was a very long exposition and setting up for a second book in the series, except as far as I can tell, it is a standalone. The first half of the book follows Virginia's journey to California, and I thought that was very interesting. I kind of wanted more of that. I wanted more horror, more creepiness during that journey. And then once we hit the 50-60% mark and Virginia gets to California, the events that occur in California got very weird. We kind of see a paranormal realm a little bit, but I feel like there wasn't enough information given about that realm, about any of the horrific stuff that was going on. There was not much background, explanation, resolution for any of it. It was just kind of inserted into the book as like, here's this really horrifying scene. Okay, that's it. And so I was left wanting. I think the plot needed a lot more development, but I think that the horror aspects were well written. Although, disclaimer, I am not a very big horror reader. I just haven't had a ton of experience in the genre, so you can take that with a grain of salt, but I thought that the horror scenes and the descriptions were done very well. I think the plot concept was interesting and just needed more development on both sides, needed to be a longer book or split into 2 books. The book just left me wanting. Then finally in December, I read 13 books and had 1 DNF, which again was not my worst read of the month. I have a tie for 2 books that I thought were my favorites. The first one is Cursed Daughters. This follows an Nigerian family in which all of the women are cursed to never keep their husbands. So there have been generation after generation of women whose husbands have left them and abandoned them and their families. And so in this book, we follow a few different points of view. I absolutely loved the multiple timelines. I loved each of these different points of view, although I loved Monif's the most. I thought Monif's story was especially painful to read because despite knowing how it was going to end, despite knowing what was going to happen to her, I was still reading her sections, holding out hope that things would work out differently for her. My main critique of this book is the epilogue. I feel like the epilogue felt a little out of nowhere. It was just throwing out a weird little resolution that wasn't hinted at too much during the rest of the book. It wasn't really explained at all. Overall, I thought that this was a really good story. The inclusion of the journal entries describing each of the women's experiences with this curse helped put it into perspective and helped you understand the weight of the trauma and the weight of the curse that these women were going through. I just thought that the writing was really good and I enjoyed this a lot. Then the other book that I really liked is a completely different vibe from Cursed Daughters. Like Cursed Daughters is heavier, more serious. The other one I liked is Yours for the Season by Usma Jalaluddin. This is a holiday romance that follows a Muslim woman and a chef who fake date for social media to help the chef secure a TV show, and it puts all of their families together in Alaska for this little holiday celebration, and you just see the fallout of all of these people being together. I really liked the cross-cultural story. I liked that both families had weird little embarrassing moments and misunderstandings. I thought that the chemistry between the 2 was very strong. The inter-family interactions were really wholesome, while the intra-family conversations were deep and realistic. It felt kind of healing to hear an immigrant family talk very openly about the struggles of generational trauma in this story. I thought that this was going to be a 5-star read for most of this book, but there was a section with a character that I just did not really like. While most of these characters felt fairly realistic, they were believable enough for this story. There was this one character that felt like a caricature of a person. He did not feel realistic at all. His motives felt really weird. All of his dialogue felt very awkward. The conflict that he created and the resolution to that conflict all were just strange. Like everything surrounding this one character was just very awkward to me, and I didn't enjoy it too much. But I loved the romantic aspect of the story. I loved the familial relationship in this. Despite that one character, I had a great time with this book. And while I was reading it, I was already excited to reread it for Christmas next year. The last book I'm going to talk about in this video, because I have been yapping for so freaking long, the worst book that I read in December, which if you have been on Book Talk at all during December, you would have seen this. It is A Heart for Christmas by Sophie Germain. Let me start with, I had some hopes for this. This follows a girl with heart problems. She had a heart operation 3 years prior to the events of this book. And so she goes to the mountains to stay with her dad for the holiday season for December. And it's the first time that she's in the mountains since her heart operation. And this was her rediscovery into living life again. In theory, there is so many boxes that this would have checked. I love the concept of an Advent style book in which you open a chapter every day. I love disability representation. I love yearning. I love best friend's brother. But all of that fell really, really flat because the writing was just very poor. The dialogue was unrealistic. It was cheesy. It was cringy. It felt like somebody attempting to use slang but not knowing what any of the slang actually means or how to use it properly. Because of the poor dialogue, all of the heartfelt moments fell very flat. They felt unnatural. I'm not quite sure if the writing issues, if the dialogue issues were because something got lost in translation, if it's a cultural difference between French and American, if the translation wasn't very good, or if the original French writing just wasn't that good at all. It was a tough read, but if you stuck around to this point of the video, thank you so much for watching. I know that this is a long one. Like, my throat is sore. I don't think I've ever talked for this much to the camera. Comment down below what your favorite and least favorite reads of 2025 were. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!